When I first moved into Oakridge Estates, I thought I'd found the kind of peace I'd been chasing for years. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, kids riding bikes without fear, and houses so picture-perfect they looked printed out of a home design magazine. I remember standing in my new front yard, the keys still warm in my hand, whispering to myself, "You did it, Leah. You actually made it." It wasn't a big house, not compared to the others on the street, but it was mine, every inch of chipped paint and squeaky floorboard paid for with my own savings, not anyone else's. I started fixing it up slowly, the way my mom taught me back when we lived in a little cabin by the river. She used to say, "Don't just build a home, Leah. Grow it." So I planted things, tomato vines, lavender, sunflowers that bent toward the morning light. I added bird feeders, strung wind chimes made from recycled glass, and set up my solar panels along the roof. They weren't pretty in a traditional sense, but they were powerful, silent proof that I could make something sustainable, something that gave back. The first time I saw her was the day I installed the panels. She walked over like she owned the ground itself. Her name was Barbara Ellison. I'd heard it whispered by the realtor before, something about the heart of the neighborhood, which I would later learn was code for the one who controls everything. Barbara was in her 50s, her hair perfectly styled, her pearl earrings catching the sunlight like tiny weapons. She carried a clipboard, which should have been my first warning sign. "Hello there," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new homeowner." "That's right. Leah Miller," I said, shaking her hand. "Well, welcome to Oakridge Estates," she said, looking past me toward the roof. "My, those are quite the panels you've got there. Interesting choice. Most of us here try to keep things a little more uniform." I smiled politely. "Yeah, I'm a designer. I like things a little unique." Her eyes flicked to the wind chimes, then to the garden bed I'd built from old wooden pallets. "Well, that certainly shows," she said, her tone dipping slightly. "Just make sure you stay within HOA standards. We wouldn't want any issues." And just like that, she turned and walked off, her perfume lingering in the air long after she left, sweet but suffocating. At first, I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has a Barbara. Someone who thinks rules are written by their own pen. But as the days went on, I realized Barbara's influence stretched far beyond friendly reminders. A week later, I got my first letter, a formal notice from the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association. Violation, non-conforming lawn decor and visible solar installation. Remedy required within 10 business days. I actually laughed when I read it. I thought it had to be a mistake. Who complains about solar panels in 2024? When I called the HOA office, a woman's voice said, "Oh, Barbara mentioned it during the last meeting. She's just concerned about maintaining the neighborhood's charm." The charm, apparently, meant beige houses and silent streets. My chimes, my lights, even my recycled art, all were visual disruptions. I took photos, sent an email appeal, and waited. No one replied. One evening, I decided to attend the HOA meeting in person. Maybe if they saw me face to face, they'd understand I wasn't trying to be difficult. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a room that smelled like coffee and control. Barbara stood at the front like a queen at her throne, speaking about lawn care and community image. When I raised my hand, she gave me a tight smile. "Yes, Leah, our new neighbor." I stood, holding my notes. "I just wanted to say, I've followed all county regulations. The solar panels are approved, and the garden is fully compliant. I think there might be some misunderstanding." Barbara didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I'm sure there's no misunderstanding," she said sweetly. "We simply ask that residents maintain an aesthetic that reflects Oakridge values. Your eclectic style might be better suited to a more, shall we say, artistic district." There were a few chuckles around the room. My face burned. I wanted to disappear, but I held my ground. "I'm not changing my home. It's efficient, sustainable, and mine." Her smile thinned. "That's your choice, of course. Just be aware, fines can add up." That night, I sat on my porch long after the sun went down, staring at the glowing panels on my roof. My hands trembled with frustration. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I thought of my mother again, her voice steady in my head. "Don't let them make you small, Leah. People fear what they don't understand." Over the next few weeks, the silent war escalated. Barbara filed new complaints: improper waste storage, my compost bin, unauthorized lighting, my solar path lights, and unsightly yard elements, my handmade sculptures. Some neighbors stopped waving when they passed. Others pretended not to see me at all. I could feel the whispers behind closed blinds: the trash girl, the eco-weirdo, the outsider who didn't fit their glossy picture of perfection. I tried to fight back with kindness. I hosted a small neighborhood tea on my lawn, serving homemade muffins and lemonade. Only one person came, a quiet widower named Tom from across the street. He said softly, "Don't take it personally, Leah. Barbara runs this place like it's her kingdom. She doesn't like change." I smiled, though it felt heavy. Maybe change is exactly what she needs. But the moment that truly broke me came a few days later. I walked out one morning to find one of my sculptures, a piece made from melted glass bottles, shattered across the sidewalk. Someone had smashed it deliberately. The pieces glittered under the sunlight, sharp and cruel. I swept them up slowly, my throat tight. Barbara walked by with her little dog, looked at the mess, and said, "Oh dear. Maybe you should keep your art inside. It seems fragile." That night, I called my mom's old number again. The voicemail picked up like always. "Hey, you've reached Carol and Leah. Leave a message and we'll call you back." Her voice hit me like a wave. I whispered, "I don't know what to do, Mom. I'm trying so hard to build something good, and all they see is trash." I sat there under the faint hum of the panels, tears finally spilling. Then I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at my yard, my colors, my light, my work. I thought of all the nights I'd worked freelance just to afford this house, of the dream I'd built with my own 2 hands. No one was going to take that from me, not Barbara, not her HOA, not anyone. So I doubled down. I added more lights, more flowers, stronger art. I filed every form, every regulation to the letter. And when Barbara passed my house and scowled, I met her eyes and smiled, not with defiance, but with certainty. She could call me trash if she wanted. But I knew the truth, everything she threw away, people like me turned into something beautiful. And one day soon, she'd see it too. Summer came early that year, the kind of dry, unrelenting heat that made the air itself feel like it was holding its breath. The lawns in Oakridge Estates, once perfect carpets of green, started fading into brittle yellow patches. Everyone watered their yards obsessively, their sprinklers running long into the afternoon, but the ground still cracked underfoot. I didn't mind it much. My garden thrived in the heat, native plants, drought-resistant, the kind that didn't demand constant attention. The irony was almost funny, my messy yard was one of the few that actually stayed alive. Barbara, of course, didn't find it funny. One afternoon, I found a new notice in my mailbox, possible fire hazard due to unapproved vegetation height. I read it twice, laughed out loud, then threw it onto the counter. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Leah, I just wanted to give you a friendly reminder," she began, her voice syrupy as ever. "The HOA is cracking down on unkempt landscaping. We all have to do our part to keep the neighborhood safe." "Right," I said flatly. "Because native plants are so dangerous." She ignored the sarcasm. "Also, some residents mentioned a faint humming sound at night, possibly from your power setup? Maybe you could turn that off." "That would be my solar inverter," I said. "It powers my house when the grid fails." "You're welcome." There was a pause, then a small huff. "Well, let's hope that doesn't happen." I almost said, "It will." The forecasts were bad this year, record heat, gusty winds, and lightning storms predicted across the hills. I'd been following the weather obsessively, checking my solar battery capacity and water reserve every night. My system wasn't just for saving money, it was designed for survival. I'd grown up off-grid. I knew how fragile comfort really was. A week later, the sky turned the color of copper. You could smell smoke in the wind long before you saw the haze. News alerts pinged across everyone's phones: wildfire near Ridgeview Canyon. High wind advisory. Prepare for evacuation. I stepped outside, watching the horizon blur into a rusty smear. The air was thick, heavy with silence and electricity. Somewhere, far off, a siren wailed. By evening, a faint ash dusted the cars and rooftops. Neighbors stood in driveways, worried but still pretending everything was fine. Barbara came by in her visor and tennis outfit, holding a clipboard as if she could schedule the fire away. "Don't panic," she said loudly to a small cluster of people. "We're in no danger. The fire's miles away. Just keep your sprinklers running." I almost wanted to laugh. Water restrictions were already in place, but Barbara treated the rules like suggestions that didn't apply to her. I watched her walk off, her perfume cutting through the smoke, and muttered, "You have no idea what's coming." That night, the wind picked up, hard. My windows rattled. The air smelled like burning pine. I barely slept, checking my system every hour. Around 2 a.m., lightning cracked so close it made the house shake. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The ridge behind Oakridge Estates glowed orange. Fire. By dawn, the news confirmed it: the wildfire had jumped containment. Roads were being closed. Power lines down. The grid was overloaded, and rolling blackouts had begun. My lights flickered once, then steadied, the hum of my inverter kicking in like a heartbeat. I looked down the street. House after house, dark. People were outside now, shouting, running garden hoses that sputtered weakly. The main water pressure had already dropped, the system couldn't handle the demand. I ran to my control panel, checking my backup tanks. Still full. My pumps ran on solar power and battery storage. I was the only house with running water and light. And then I heard Barbara screaming. I sprinted toward her voice, the air burning my throat. Flames licked the hill behind her backyard, moving fast. Her husband was throwing buckets of water that evaporated before hitting the ground. The garden hose lay limp, a useless snake. "Water pressure's gone," he shouted. "Nothing's coming through." Barbara turned toward me, her face streaked with soot. "Leah. Please. Do something." For a split second, I froze. After all the things she'd said, after the months of humiliation, she was begging me now. But then I saw the fire roll closer, and instinct took over. "Get back!" I yelled, running to my system terminal. I tapped through the settings, opening a waterline valve that linked to my neighbor's yards. I designed it months ago, just in case of emergencies like this. Within seconds, sprinklers along the fence line burst to life, not just mine, but the houses beside me too. The water hissed and steamed, creating a barrier of mist that slowed the flames. People started cheering, shouting directions. "Follow her line. Connect it over here." I watched the fire stop short of Barbara's porch, the glow reflecting off her wide eyes. Her husband clutched her shoulders, both of them shaking. When the fire trucks finally arrived, they focused on the ridge. Our block was already soaked, the flames contained. One of the firefighters came up to me later, panting, his helmet streaked with ash. "That water system yours?" he asked. "You saved this street, ma'am." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Barbara walked up slowly. Her expensive clothes were covered in soot, her perfect nails cracked. For once, she didn't have her clipboard or her smirk. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. She started, then swallowed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, turning back to check the pumps. "Just glad everyone's safe." But as I walked home, I heard her whisper, barely audible, "Thank you, Leah." That night, the neighborhood was silent except for the faint crackle of distant flames. Power was still out for everyone except me. My house glowed softly, a beacon in the dark. I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the smoke drift across the moon. My phone buzzed with missed calls from local reporters, emergency alerts, messages from neighbors thanking me. But I didn't answer any of them. I just sat there, thinking about my mother. She would have been proud. Not because I was right, but because I didn't let bitterness win. I'd done what needed to be done, even for someone who never would have done the same for me. At around midnight, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Barbara standing there, holding a small lantern. She looked older, smaller somehow. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "May I sit with you?" I nodded, and she lowered herself into the chair beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was human. After a while, she said quietly, "I used to think people like you just wanted attention. But tonight, I realized you're the only one who actually cared about this place." I didn't know what to say. So I just smiled a little and replied, "Guess we all protect what we love, in our own way." She nodded slowly. "I called you trash," she whispered. "And you saved my home." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet ash and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing, the kind of sound you don't notice until you've almost lost everything. I looked at her, then at the faint glow of my panels across the roof, and said softly, "That's the funny thing about trash, Barbara. Sometimes it's just something people haven't learned to value yet." The morning after the fire felt like waking up inside a dream that didn't know how to end. The sky was still gray, a heavy blanket of smoke hanging over the neighborhood. Everything smelled like ashes and wet soil. My solar lights still glowed faintly, casting small circles of gold over the charred edges of the lawn. The silence was strange, too still, too cautious, as if the world was holding its breath. When I stepped outside, I saw the damage clearly for the first time. The hill behind the houses was blackened, trees reduced to twisted skeletons, the once green trail now a scar. But the houses on our street still stood, untouched except for the soot that painted their walls. And there, right at the edge of my driveway, was Barbara. She was sweeping the ash from her sidewalk, her movements slow and deliberate. When she looked up and saw me, she gave a small nod, not her usual tight, controlled one, but a real one. Respectful. Human. "Morning," she said, her voice rough. "Morning," I replied. She hesitated for a moment, then added quietly, "It's something, isn't it? How close it got." I nodded. "Yeah. Too close." She put down the broom and came closer. Her eyes were red, not from crying, though maybe a little, but from the smoke. She looked at my house, at the panels gleaming faintly through the haze. "I had no idea you'd built all that," she said softly. "The batteries, the water system. It's incredible." I shrugged a little. "It's just what I do. Design for sustainability." I guess I've always believed homes should protect people, not just look nice. Barbara let out a short laugh, one that cracked halfway through. And all this time, I was worried about your garden not matching the neighborhood. I didn't answer, but I smiled. That was enough. Later that afternoon, people began trickling out of their homes. Some were crying, others just wandering around, checking fences and rooftops, picking up pieces of their day-to-day lives that had been shaken loose. I helped Tom from across the street clean up his yard. He kept patting my shoulder, saying, "You saved us, Leah. You saved all of us." Word spread fast. By evening, the whole neighborhood knew who had kept their homes from burning. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid me were now walking up my driveway to thank me, some with trembling voices, others with small, awkward smiles. It was strange, I didn't feel proud or vindicated. Just peaceful. Like the earth had finally exhaled. Barbara showed up again at sunset, holding a tray. "I made something," she said shyly, and I almost didn't recognize her without her perfect makeup or her pearls. "It's lasagna. My husband says it's the only thing I can cook right." I laughed, surprised. "Lasagna sounds perfect." She sat with me on the porch while we ate, the air finally cool and soft again. She kept glancing at my garden, her eyes lingering on the melted glass sculpture I'd rebuilt that morning, a smaller version, but brighter somehow. "It's beautiful," she said. "I never saw it before, not really." "That's okay," I said gently. "Most people don't, until the light hits it just right." We both smiled at that. And for the first time since I'd moved to Oakridge, it felt like home. Not because everyone accepted me, but because I didn't need them to anymore. A week later, the local paper ran a story about the fire, local woman solar system saves neighborhood. They interviewed me on camera. I tried to stay humble, explaining it wasn't about heroics, just preparation. But when they asked about Barbara and the HOA conflict, I said, people change when they understand each other. Sometimes it just takes a spark, literal or not, to make that happen. The video went viral. Suddenly, Oakridge Estates wasn't just a picture-perfect suburb, it was the community saved by the woman everyone underestimated. A few environmental groups reached out to me, asking to feature my designs. Even the county council wanted a copy of my layout for future emergency planning. It was overwhelming, but it felt right, like all those nights I'd spent soldering wires and running tests in my garage had finally meant something bigger than myself. One evening, Barbara invited me to an HOA meeting. I hesitated at first, but curiosity won. When I walked into the clubhouse, everyone turned to look at me, not with judgment this time, but with gratitude. Barbara stood at the front, holding her clipboard, though it seemed smaller in her hands now. "Before we begin," she said, her voice steady, "I'd like to make an announcement." She motioned to me. "Leah Miller has shown us what true community looks like. Her innovation, her care for the environment, and her courage quite literally saved our homes. From this day forward, Oakridge Estates will officially support sustainable home designs and green energy installations. It's time we learned from the person we once called different." Applause filled the room. I didn't know where to look, my face burned, but in a good way. For once, I wasn't the outsider. I was just Leah, the girl who built something good. After the meeting, Barbara came up to me, holding out a small box. "I wanted to give you this," she said. Inside was a tiny silver charm shaped like a sunflower. "For your garden," she said. "To remind us what can grow when we stop judging." I smiled and hugged her, something I never thought I'd do. "Thank you," I whispered. The weeks turned into months. The hills began to heal, green sprouting through blackened soil, the air smelling cleaner again. Kids played outside, laughing as they ran past my yard, pointing at the sculptures like they were treasures. Sometimes, Barbara would stop by with cookies or fresh lemonade, and we'd talk about small things, the weather, the garden, her grandkids visiting for the summer. She was still Barbara, opinionated, particular, but different now. Softer. Real. One night, as I sat outside watching the stars reflect off the panels on my roof, I thought about everything that had happened. The fire, the fear, the change. How close we'd all come to losing everything. And how something I built from scraps, from what others might have called trash, ended up saving an entire street. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night, "You see that, Mom? You were right. People fear what they don't understand. But sometimes, they just need to see the light." The wind rustled through the chimes, soft and sweet. I smiled. Maybe it was just the breeze. Or maybe it was her. When I went inside, I paused by the window, looking out at the neighborhood, at Barbara's house, her new solar panels gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She'd asked me to design them for her. Said she wanted to catch up with the future. I'd agreed, of course. Not out of revenge, but because that's what people like me do. We build. We forgive. We move forward. The next morning, I found a handwritten note on my doorstep. It was from Barbara. "Dear Leah, I used to think you didn't belong here. But now I realize, you're the best thing that ever happened to this neighborhood. Thank you for teaching me what real beauty looks like. Barbara. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my journal, right next to an old photograph of my mother holding a little girl in a sunflower field. Me. Back then, I never imagined that kindness and resilience could be their own kind of revenge, the quiet kind that doesn't hurt anyone but changes everything. As I stood in the morning light, my reflection glimmering faintly on the solar glass, I realized something simple but powerful. People like Barbara will always exist, people who judge what they don't understand. But so will people like me, who turn judgment into fuel and pain into purpose. And maybe that's how the world balances itself, one spark at a time. I smiled, whispering the words that had carried me through it all. Trash can burn. But sometimes, it's what saves the world. Sometimes, the ones people look down on end up being the ones who lift everyone else up. This was Leah's story, but it could be any of ours. Judged. Misunderstood. Still standing strong. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who believes in quiet strength, and subscribe to Revenge Sekar for more stories where karma, justice, and heart collide. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the one they call trash. This is Revenge Sekar, where every story has its turn for justice.